All right, everybody, welcome. Episode number 5 of the Vintage Spotlight podcast. My name is Jeremy Lee, and I am joined by my co-host, Mr. Leighton Sheldon of Just Collect. We are excited to be back for another episode. Leighton, how have you been doing? What is going on in the world of Leighton Sheldon and Just Collect?
I've been great, Jeremy. Excited to be back. How have you been?
I've been good. I'm right now very excited. Not this weekend, but next weekend, I will be going to the Philly show, which I've never been to before. I'm going to see you again. Who'd have thunk I'd see you so soon after the Cleveland National? But and New York Fanatics Fest. Never mind. So, boy, 3 times in 2 months. That's a record for us, huh?
It is. And I'm excited for the show. I'm excited to have you down there. I think it's gonna be great.
I'm excited for it as well. Well, listen, we have a fun show lineup. We have a guest. We're bringing on Nate, also known as In Cardboard Veritas on Instagram. He's a great vintage collector. He's got his own podcast. We're going to get to it. But why don't we jump right in, Leighton, and talk about some of the key sales from one of the auction houses, one of our favorite auction houses that recently ended. These are some items that you have selected. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to get right into this. I'm going to go ahead now and bring up the screen, Leighton, and we're going to start looking at a couple of these really interesting Rose Company postcards, including this one right here of Cy Young. Now, I hadn't seen these before. $37,000 for the Cy Young here in a PSA 3 holder. Why don't you take us through? And really, what I want to understand is, how do vintage collectors who focus on these, I don't want to say oddball pieces, but non-standard sized card pieces, how do they look at these? What is the importance of these pieces?
Sure. I mean, those are all great questions. And for those that are kind of just tuning in, we appreciate you joining us here in the Vintage Spotlight. The particular auction house we're talking about here is Memory Lane Inc. So you can find them at memorylaneinc.com. And the reason why I chose to discuss their auction is because I myself was bidding as a collector and as a dealer, owning Just Collect this past weekend. I did win a few cards, but I did not win any of these Rose Company postcards. And the reason why I wanted to discuss them, first and foremost, Jeremy, as you bring up the Cy Young, aren't they just beautiful looking cards?
They're really interesting. The green tone is the color of the turf or the grass. I like that you've got the baselines coming through. You got the pitcher's mound. You've got home plate, and then you've got the portrait image of the subject in a really nice decorative, circle with the 2 bats going through, the ball on top. Like, they thought of all the details. They have the whole game pictured here on this one card. I think they're very nice.
And I feel similar to you, and I think a lot of folks do. But also, it's not that well known because it's not easy to find. And so that's why I chose to talk about it today. In particular, the one that you're looking at, the Cy Young, just because you had brought up the image itself, I believe all, or if not most, of the images in the Rose Company postcard set are Carl Horner images. And if you feel like you've heard that name before, you probably have. In collecting, he's very well known and synonymous with doing the photography for other major important sets of the time period. And so it's no accident that the Rose Company postcard decided to choose some really quality photographs. And it also just happens to be one of the most ornate sets ever produced. And obviously, as you just pointed out, it's not an accident it was produced with this quality. The Rose Company postcard company was out of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and they actually produced an incredible number of postcards, but not baseball. This was kind of them stepping out of, if you will, the proverbial batter's box. And they really kind of like jumped in to the deep end of the pool, because in 1908 and 1909, they offered a set, which at the time of 192 subjects was fairly large. And they were slated to be sold or retailed at 2 for 5 cents, or you can get an entire team of 12 for 25 cents. And of course, as you look at this particular example, you were asking, how does someone even go about, valuing this? And one of the things I thought about, which is just kind of a fun metric for me, so they're very rare. In other words, I'd be shocked if any of them in the pop reports combined with PSA and SGC have a pop greater than 10. Most of them probably are single digits on one hand, or between 5 and 10. And so what I find really interesting in terms of the pricing, Jeremy, I'm curious your thoughts, is if you take a PSA 3 of the Cy Young portrait card from the T206 set, so it's the most desirable card, very well known, and obviously much easier to find than this Rose Company postcard. That card sells for about $3,500, sometimes a little bit more, a little bit less in that condition. So if you look at what this particular example sold for, which is about $37,000, it's 10 times or about 10 times more. Except, Jeremy, the card is absolutely 10 times more difficult to find than the Cy Young portrait card from the T206 set. And I'm not suggesting it's a good deal, but I do believe that there are some collectors who are going through this kind of thinking when it comes to figuring out what they should pay for an example such as this such as this Rose Company postcard from a really gorgeous set.
Okay, so first of all, I loved your use of the word ornate, because that's exactly what I was thinking when I was looking at this item. Now, you also just mentioned the population. So while you were speaking, I went to the PSA site, to the app, and I typed in the serial number on the card here, the 6317, and I found that this card in a PSA 3 is a Pop 1. And it says it right here in the description. I also found that it's the only copy ever slabbed by PSA right here. So $37,000 for a Ty Cobb card from pre-1910.
Cy Young.
Cy Young. Thank
That's
you.
Okay.
Does not surprise me at all. I'm actually a little surprised that it didn't sell for more. This is the only copy in a PSA holder. The other one apparently is in an SGC holder, and we know that PSA is, kind of the market leader. So I'm somewhat surprised. Now, you in your travels, which is all you do is travel and hunt for baseball card treasures like this, have you come across collectors of this set? Do you know people who are looking for it? Do you think that the buyer of this card on memory lane here, do you think that they acquired this card because they're working on the Rose Company postcard set, or are they a Cy Young collector? What's your best guess there? What's your gut feel?
Sure. So one thing I want to point out before I answer those questions, Jeremy, is that this particular variation is the no team variation. So it's quite difficult to find. But regardless, all of the Rose Company postcards are fairly difficult to find. So if you had to take a guess, I believe that the person who bought this card is either a Christy Mathewson collector or a pre-war collector, or, to be fair, there's someone that just wants to buy high-end vintage baseball, because the notion of trying to pick up this Cy Young and think that you're going to work on the set, I mean, your kids might be long gone by the time you finish the Rose Company postcard epic set from 1908 and 1909. And I agree with you. I think that in maybe, and I don't believe it's our hobby, but I believe in different economic times, because I do believe that there's some turbulent times ahead of us, not just in the United States, but potentially around the world, financial turbulent times. I think that this could easily sell for $50,000 or more at some point in the future if the buyer is inclined to reconsign or sell it in the future.
Yeah. Now, I made I had a little slip. I said Ty Cobb. I meant Cy Young. You said Christy Mathewson. Did you mean?
Oh,
Cy
it's
Young?
funny. I meant, well, because they actually sold 3 of them. They sold the Cy Young, a Christy Mathewson, and a Moonlight Graham. So I think I read it really fast because I saw a C. But yes, we're all trying to figure out, who our players are today. But I think that one of the things that we are all in agreement on is that really aesthetically, this is the kind of card that if you were going to own a type card, meaning one card from a set, even if it's a common, I would allow myself to own a common from the set, because I just think it's such a gorgeous set. But you did ask another interesting question, and this is how I know the cards are super duper rare. So I've bought and sold through my company, Just Collect, about $50 million of vintage cards in my lifetime. And in my travels, in other words, when I go out on the road, or people sending collections to my office to be appraised and to ultimately be sold to us, I can tell you on one hand the number of Rose postcards that I've come across in the wild through the years. They are extremely challenging, very difficult. And it's part of the reason why I was so excited to see the Moonlight Graham available for sale in memory lane. What I was not excited about was what it sold for.
17,300. Is that too low, too high? What are your thoughts?
Well, here's the thing. It's not a matter of if I think it's too low or too high. I wasn't comfortable spending $17,000 for a player who has only appeared in one major league game and never had a single at bat. But obviously his folklore and the story behind Moonlight Graham is really what is, I guess the driving force between, behind the demand for it. And obviously for yours truly to be bidding on it was really the same thing. But at some point I felt it was irresponsible to, go at that level or above. And to be fair, I don't know if the person who won it was willing to pay $37,000 instead of $17,000. I have no idea.
All right. If you are listening on podcast, as Vintage Spotlight is available, you are not seeing these images, feel free to go check out the images on the YouTube channel, the Vintage Spotlight YouTube channel. You can see them there as well. Let's move on. Leighton, we have this 1980 Topps Larry Bird, Magic Johnson rookie with Dr. J in the middle. This is a PSA 9 copy of the card, and the autographs grade out at a 10. And this card sold also on memory lane for a staggering $173,390. Leighton, we talked about this a couple days ago, and I think we're both pretty surprised by the lofty realized price here. In my opinion, this card in a PSA 9 is worth what, about $15,000?
Well, 12 to 15,000, sure.
$12 to $15,000 without the autographs. So this is about a $660,000 premium for these autographs on this card, graded a 10 by PSA. Leighton, my first thoughts on this, and I'm just going to be, kind of blunt and honest, is I think it's somewhat ridiculous of a value, to be honest, that this card realized such a high price. To me, this card, I wouldn't have batted an eye if this card sold for $25,000, maybe $30,000, maybe doubling the value to add the autographs, because all three of these guys are living and are signing, and there are dozens, if not hundreds, of this card out there autographed by all three of these legendary athletes. So, congratulations to the consigner, to Memory Lane, of course, on such a big price on this card. But I just don't understand it, and I still don't understand it. Can you help me understand this?
No, that's why I brought it to your attention when we were talking a few days ago. Just another interesting fact about it is it actually is the most expensive item that they sold in their multi-million-dollar auction. And so if you remember, Jeremy, when I first brought it to your attention, it was not only because I was in awe and shocked by the sale price, but I was kind of asking the question, hey, are we missing something? Mm-hmm. In other words, because these guys are living, they're in the present day, and they're, in some way, shape, or form, part of pop culture, right? More so than Willie Mays, which will be the next, card we talk about for Memory Lane sale. It still bewilders my brain as to what I could purchase for that kind of money. And also, even if you don't know the hobby, in other words, let's just say this is a newish collector who bought this, or a newish investor to the space, I would think you'd still ask yourself some common sense questions. In other words, can I buy this card raw? Can I get these three players' autographs? They're alive. Do these folks actually go out and sign on the show circuit? They do. Are PSA 9s available of the card? Yes. And then I would do what you asked, Jeremy. Forget about the signed version. How many versions of this card maybe exists? Thousands of them? So when I saw that, but then as we show the next card, for the life of me, I could not grasp how this card sold for this, and then a 1951 Bowman Willie Mays rookie that was graded at a PSA 4, but with a 10 auto, and admittedly it is a beautiful auto in like the perfect spot on the card. And I know there's not a lot of these, but this card sold for what, $103,000 or $100,845.
Yeah.
And so Jeremy and I are both of the same opinion. Help us make sense of this. And the only sense I can make of it is it doesn't make sense. And that, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And so if for some reason or another, someone had to have that Magic Bird Dr. J card signed by all three with a Gem Mint 10 auto, that day, that moment, that time. Well, as I said to you the other day, Jeremy, it still took someone else to want that card that day and that time, etc. And so it perplexes me as well as you. And for the money, I would have bought the maze for $100,000 and had 73,000 left over
to go buy 5 PSA 9 Jordan Magic, not Jordan, Magic Bird Irving.
Yeah,
card.
Dr. J, sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Interesting stuff. The one thing I want to mention about the Maze rookie here with the auto, the 51 Bowman Maze rookie, the card is graded a 4, and it's not the prettiest 4 I've seen, but the autograph is amazing. It is a Sharpie autograph, so it's like a post-playing days autograph signed later on in life. It's still commanded over $100,000. If that was a ballpoint autograph from his playing days, I could see that price being even higher because the collectors of those types of cards do like cards that were signed while they were playing. So just one little nuance to point out right there. Okay, well, what we like to do next, Leighton, and everybody listening and watching, is talk a bit about the set that one of these cards came from that we observed from the Memory Lane auction, this week being the Memory Lane auction, and the Rose Company postcards. Now, we already kind of went through, Leighton, the importance of the set itself, but I wanted to transition into postcards as collectibles themselves, because it's a category of sports cards, but they're, again, I kind of refer to them as oddball without insulting them, just because they're a different size. They're just bigger than they didn't come out of tobacco packs or gum packs or candy packs. They were postcards. They were meant to be mailed, written on with a stamp. Those that didn't get have a stamp affixed to them, those that didn't have writing on them must be much rarer. You know, like, dude, in the world of collecting postcards, Leighton, of sports figures, do you ever find out there copies that have letters written on the back with a stamp? And is that a valuable addition, or is that a mark on the card that people would not like? Have you seen that? What's your take?
It's a great question, Jeremy. So first, for full disclosure, I collect RPCs, real photo postcards. I have one of Honus Wagner. I have one of Cobb. And the feelings surrounding the back can differ from collector to collector. Meaning, for some people, and you asked a question, I thought it was great because technically, the writing on the back of these postcards does lower the grade. So I do believe that, for the most part, people have chosen STC to grade the real photo postcards because they don't have an MK qualifier. They would just grade the card lower, whereas PSA, of course, would throw an MK qualifier on it. That being said, I feel, and I think other collectors have a similar sentiment, that when you have writing on the back, it's not just a random letter or number, it's a little note, and it's like a trip back in time to exactly what was going on during that moment or that time period. And for me, that's really super special. And so even though I'm a baseball card purist in that I would prefer my RPCs with no writing, I actually love that some of them sell for a little bit less than I think they should when they have writing on the back. And that's how I feel about it. What do you think? Jeremy?
I often look at a vintage card that is in low to mid grade, and it's got, rounded corners, the odd crease, maybe some pencil marking on the back. And I think, boy, this card sure could tell a story if it had a voice. Well, a postcard with writing on the back actually tells a story. So when you said that, the writing on the back, PSA would give it an MK or qualifier, or that it would grade lower with writing on the back, that's a situation for me as a collector where, and if I was into these things, where I would ignore the grade completely. The technical grade wouldn't matter. We talk about eye appeal. We talk about technical grade. Well, what about story appeal? Because only a postcard with the story written on the back from someone to their who knows, to from a wife to her husband who's in the war or whatever it might be. I can only imagine some of the stories that were written on the backs of these postcards, and those have been lost to history permanently. That would be super interesting. If any of those survived, that would be really interesting as well. I also wanted to talk about in hockey, we have the Sweet Caporal postcards. that are extremely elusive, highly sought after by hockey historians, vintage hockey collectors, and I've seen so many non-traditional hockey collectors express interest and desire to own Sweet Cap hockey postcards. Tell us from now. I've never owned one. I don't covet them because you need to draw. We as collectors need to draw the line somewhere and really allocate our resources. So I prefer to collect the Imperial Tobacco C55, C56, C57 cards from that era, which in many cases use the same image. But you, in your travels, you being the vintage expert that you are, what do you see when it comes to these Sweet Cap hockey postcards in terms of their desirability, the depth of collectors who are chasing them, and do you ever come across them in your travels?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. As I just told you a few minutes ago, I've seen through the years on the road less than one hand's worth of the Rose Company postcards out in the wild, probably like 4 or 5 if I had to guess. I believe I've seen 2 Sweet Cap hockey postcards outside of auction. Wow. Now, keep in mind, I know there's a number of them in collectors' hands, but the folks that I've met with either didn't have them or had them and weren't willing to sell them at the time. I think that you described it very well. There's very few issues, and it's an interesting subject for maybe another episode of the Vintage Spotlight. How many issues transcend card collecting where they actually get people from a different discipline or a different sport to come over? And I believe on today's episode, we've discussed 2 of them: Rose Company postcards and Sweet Cap hockey postcards. And to me, that's what the Vintage Spotlight is all about, is having some fun on here, talking about what we collect. And of course, that's what we're going to do in a few minutes with our guest, Nate. Man, I'm kind of excited now to get to the winter Toronto show. Like, I can tell you high on my list, besides O-Pee-Chee baseball, I don't buy commons. You know that. I'm a type collector that typically sticks to Hall of Famers. Sweet Cap hockey, if I need to have a common instead of a Hall of Famer at this point, I'll take it. Nice.
I whenever I see one in the wild at a card show or even a picture at auction, it does draw me in, and I appreciate the history, and that's enough for me as a collector of cardboard. But I do hear from so many seasoned vintage collectors that these are the ultimate treasure when it comes to vintage hockey card collecting, and I'm not surprised, that we've both experienced non-hockey collectors also express some serious interest just because of the sheer rarity and beauty of those pieces. Okay, good stuff. Let's move on now to our collector spotlight segment, where we bring on a guest, and we do have waiting for us in the green room, Nate, give me the thumbs up if you're ready to join us on screen. Let's bring out Nate, also known as In Cardboard Veritas on Instagram. He's also one of the hosts of the Rough Cuts Vintage Hobby Talk podcast, which Nate, you guys just transitioned from being an Instagram live only to now being on YouTube and on the podcast platforms. Congratulations on that. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. Thanks, Leighton. Appreciate you guys having me on. And we did. We just moved the show over to YouTube primarily for audio quality, for the putting it on podcast and just making it a little more user friendly. And we're not high volume, high velocity show. We do about one a month or so, but we try to have some good fun and go pretty deeply substantive on vintage cards when we go on. So we have a lot of fun doing it, and looking forward to doing it some more now that we're on YouTube.
And I'm looking forward to hearing, watching or hearing more of those episodes. I did tune in live to the first one a couple nights ago. I said hello, and then I went back and listened to the whole thing later on that evening, and I enjoyed it because we are many of us are, and I say this without any derogatory connotation, we are cardboard nerds. That's what we love. We love this stuff. And later on in the show, after you're done, Nate, we're going to go through a personal pickup, and I have one that I'm just been elated to add to my collection, And I feel like, what you talk about on Rough Cuts resonates with me, because I can dive into the back of a card and just feel the romance of it and the history and the story. And I don't know if it was you or one of your co-hosts on the first episode on YouTube, and I forget the exact phrase, but I think it was you, Nate. I think you said that card fronts are for the art and card backs are for the history. Is that how you put it? Did I get that right?
It is. Yeah. And yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, we spend vast majority of our attention, I feel like, on the card fronts, and probably rightly so, but the backs, our thought was needed a little bit more attention as well. And there are some really fun and interesting backs that kind of bring, just like Leighton was making the point about the postcards and, some of those that have writing on them and what was going on at the time. And that's one of the reasons that, I think we really enjoy the backs as well. You have the contemporaneous writing, from the era that the card came out in, and, talks about the player, maybe uses a little different wording and phrasing than we're used to today. And so, you use the word romance, Jeremy, and it's kind of historical and romantic and really pulls you back to that period in a way that, sometimes is even a bit more powerful than the front of the card can.
Yeah, that's such an interesting outlook. Now, can you let us know, because this is, again, Collector Spotlight. That's what Leighton and I call the segment on our notes. And I want you to share with our viewers and listeners a bit about how do you approach collecting vintage cards? What are maybe some of the criteria that you look at? What's the process you go through when you identify a target and then decide, okay, this is the card I want to acquire. Here's the process I'm going to go through. These are the criteria to identify the proper copy. Do you like to acquire them at shows, online? Do you want to touch and feel them first? Take us through what it's like to be Nate when you do identify a new target card that you really passionately want to add to your personal collection.
Yeah. Wow. So, I'd say just starting at kind of a high level in terms of kind of my overall approach, it's, I have two main things that I try to work within. And one is my annual budget that I set for myself. And then, which we're all constrained in that regard. And then the other is I keep a list of kind of the top 40 or 50 cards that I want at any given time. My primary focus is on the top 8 or 10 or so, and those are the ones that I'd say I really want. And that list changes very frequently, and cards move up and down, and sometimes I discover that I really wanted a card that hadn't even been on my list. But so those are kind of the two main parameters in kind of identifying which cards I want to go after and which cards I'm able to go after. And I try to stick to the budget at least kind of on a sort of a quarterly basis. Sometimes I'll have a big buying month and then you have to go quiet for a couple months, or, kind of not buy anything for a while and feel like I can splurge for a big card. But, when I identify one that I really want, it's very often a process. And I think, that's one of the things that we all enjoy about vintage collecting so much is, I'll use a pretty recent example, which is the T206 Walter Johnson portrait, the beautiful card with the yellow back. And that card sat in my top 3, I think, on my want list for about 3 years. And, there are, I don't know what the population, the PSA pop on that card is probably 1,000 or so. And there's probably a similar number in SGC slip, so you see plenty of those. And in every large auction, you'll see several, but, every vintage card is unique. And I'm someone, as I continue to evolve my collecting, I've really focused pretty intensively on eye appeal and, my ideal card. And I know I've heard you guys talk some about this as well. And I've, really enjoyed the shows and episodes that you guys have done so far. But, if I can find a 2 or a 2.5 in a card like that looks really, really nice, that's my ideal, so it's kind of doesn't hit the budget as hard, but hits the eye really, really well. And so it took me about 3 years of looking at hundreds of Walter Johnson portrait cards to finally find the PSA 2.5 that's in my collection. And I'll shout out one of my rough cuts partners, Matthew, 1956 Topps guy. He brought this example to my attention. It was on eBay. It was a buy it now, which, we try to avoid buy it nows, but every once in a while there's some good buy it now deals. And so, struck up a conversation. It was a collector and we ended up working out a deal. And so that's kind of the process. And I would say most often I buy online, and we're spoiled. I grew up collecting in the 80s, and you guys know, like, you'd be happy if you could find 84 Don Russ Mattingly to look at somewhere, but now it's like every card in the world is available to us online. And so when you're really selective, having that type of option and breadth of examples to look at is really helpful. So I love buying at shows. I love private sales. I love doing trades when I can, but for the most part, it's looking at bunches of examples online until I find the right one.
I think that's great. I love the patient approach. I take that myself. I have a list that is not quite 30 deep as you do or often have, but even top 3, top 5 cards that I'm after. And it's sort of a balancing act, because when I focus on a card, and I want your thoughts on this, Nate, do you ever get worried that if you wait too long, the price is going to appreciate to the point where it can't fit into your budget? So do you have to kind of take a modified approach of, beggars can't be choosers, and maybe compromise a little bit? Or are you just willing to wait to find the right card at the right price? And if you have to come down in technical grade point to fit into the budget, you will, which is, I suppose, a bit of a compromise as well. How do you reconcile that?
Yeah. So I prefer to wait to find the right example, but I think an important thing to, I talk about those two elements with the budget and the want list, but I feel like you have to maintain some flexibility, or at least I do, and try to be opportunistic when you can as well. Like I don't ever want to be too rigid in my collecting. And to the point that you make, I have sometimes gotten examples of cards that I've sort of known probably isn't my permanent example, but I got a little impatient and saw one that kind of looked good enough, and and it can sort of tide you over for a while and also get you on a rung of the ladder with that card. And then, you can kind of avoid being passed by with it if you're able to get an example. And then if you find one that you like for your, forever PC after that, then you have an opportunity to potentially either trade up or buy the new example and then sell the old one. But one that I feel like has, kind of annoyingly passed me by, and it hasn't passed me by, but I feel like it's gotten a lot more expensive and it's been high on my list for a while, is the Tip Top Bread Yogi Berra, which I think is kind of an XRC, is what I would consider it. And I've wanted that card for a while now, and I just can't find one. And there have been a couple I've bid on where I've been the underbidder, and then that's a problem too, because I'm pushing up the price of the card that I want because I've underbid like 2 or 3 times on examples that I've liked. So, there's a delicate dance there for sure.
I think one of the most beautiful things about collecting vintage versus modern and ultra modern is that with vintage, just about every single copy of the target card is different. So, you mentioned maybe there's 1,000 or 2,000 of the Mathewsons out there, and they're all going to be a little bit different. So we can really hone in on what we in particular like about it. And if we do make a compromise and buy one that doesn't fit all our criteria or hit all our criteria dead on, we can always go make an exchange at the hobby teller down the road, just upgrade, trade it out, recover some of the money that we spent on the first one, put it towards the new one as well. I have 2 things left I wanted to ask you. And the first one is,
before you jump in, Jeremy, I wanted to ask one thing for our audience. And Nate, I've checked out your content, and what we're trying to do here is similar to you in that we want to make sure that people who are listening to this, they might understand, if they're not in the hobby, what we mean. So one of the things that's very clear to you, me, and Jeremy, but may not be clear to, let's say, someone who's re-entered the space 20 years later after collecting as a kid, is this notion of why do you like, I know the reason, but I want you to tell the audience, why do you like when the front looks really good, but there might be paper loss on the back? And the reasons to me, of course, I would imagine are budgetary, but I'm curious, do you carry that on every single purchase that you make? Or in other words, if you buy, let's just say a Walter Johnson with that kind of caveat and you save money, do you allow yourself to spring for a PSA 7 of another card you covet? I just wanted to discuss that because I thought it was relevant and the audience might want to know that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Right. It's always, trade-offs. And yeah, it's really, I think part of it is budgetary and, budget conservation. And, what I ultimately, my core collection, I feel like that I'm trying to build is classic cards of, really high eye appeal classic cards. And I've gotten more into pre-war over the last couple years, but pre-war and post-war, I do basketball and baseball, a little bit of football, and so if I can get that Walter Johnson card for $3,000, and it looks in it, the front appearance is of a card that would otherwise be $40,000 if it didn't have a slight bit of paper loss on the back. Well, boy, that saves me a lot of extra budget to be able to put toward other cards. So that's certainly part of it. But part of it too is, I feel like there's some thrill in the hunt and a little bit of sort of hobby purism. And, can I find an example of a card and, that's 2 or a 3 that looks like an 8, and there's just something really unique about having those cards that look so beautiful to the eye that are in the lower grade holder that just sort of almost feel like they shouldn't exist. And it's a little bit of a kind of quirk of grading almost, that it's so technical and it doesn't take into account what your eye perceives as much. And it feels like there's a lot of opportunity for collectors in that gap between, how people grade cards and how they hit the eyes. And I like to exploit that gap.
No, listen, that's wonderful. I think that you described the game of looking for a vintage card very well. And I think our audience can appreciate that, because you can go out and buy a Walter Johnson card, as you described, for potentially even less than a couple thousand. The portrait I know is tough, but you might be able to, if you're willing to accept massive paper loss on the back, or lots of writing, for example, or a clipped corner. But other than that, it looks fresh, maybe $1,500. When you're talking about a PS8 Walter Johnson portrait, what's, I don't know, 100,000, a couple 100,000, depending on the pop and all that good stuff. And I think it's important for collectors to know that there's room for all of us, in this space as far as budget. And I think that's exciting.
Such a great question, Leighton. Glad you jumped in with that. Nate, you've obviously crafted and created your approach to the hobby. For context, how long have you been collecting vintage, and how long did it take you to arrive at your current, well, I guess it's the same answer, but really why I'm asking is, how long did it take you to evolve into the vintage collector you are today?
Yeah. So, I started collecting as a kid in the 80s, early 80s a little bit. And then the first kind of big chase for me was 85 tops, buying from my corner convenience store and looking for Dwight Gooden and Eric Davis cards to come out of there. And, and I was really into it for about 5 or 6 years, from ages like kind of 11 to 17 or 18, in that age range. And my dad was a big sports fan and grew up a Yankees fan, and from the New York area. And so, he had collected as a kid. His mom actually threw out his collection. Classic example. It's like the only thing that she's ever done wrong in his eyes. But, so he kind of got me going on vintage cards when I was a kid a little bit. The one that really stood out that I had in my collection as a kid was the 58 Topps All-Star Mickey Mantle. And I think that's a really nice kind of entry vintage collector card. I know there are a lot of people that have early memories of that card, and I cherished that one. I also had a really heavily worn 54 tops Ted Williams #1, the beautiful orange card. So, so I had it, I was mostly into the Canseco's and Maguires and Griffeys and all that when I was a kid, but my dad kind of introduced me to the vintage element as well, and I liked it, and I really enjoyed that piece. And so when I got back into it in 2020, as so many of us did after, in my case, about 30 years out of the hobby, I'd still dabbled a little bit here and there, but really came all back in. That's what I immediately gravitated toward. And I think the first card that I got was a 61 Fleer Bob Cousy. And, I just kind of started, well, I'll tell you, my first thing was, all right, let me sort through my old cards because I want to, maybe sell them and make some money. And within like a couple weeks, I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I need to add a bunch of cards. So, that's happened to a lot of people. But, so those were really what appealed to me. And, it's the historical element. And I think over those last, 4 or 5 years now, I've gone deep into vintage. I started off doing vintage basketball and then kind of started collecting some Jackie Robinson cards from there. And then that got me sort of into 40s and 50s vintage baseball. And then kind of started going earlier and earlier and, I've really gotten into more pre-war stuff. Now, the collector I am, I think all of us are evolving constantly, and I'll be a different collector next month and in a year. And that's part of the beauty of the journey. And, my collection will never be done, and I'll never be done evolving as a collector, hopefully. I think it's, we all view it as a lifelong pursuit and passion. And, so I've changed certainly since I was a teenage collector, and I've changed since I came in 2020, but we're all just kind of, I'd say a big part of it really is the community, and talking to other great collectors, guys like yourselves that have been doing it for decades, and, learning from other folks, seeing what they value, what they like to collect, and then, which of those things resonate with you as a person and as a collector, and as, kind of what you want to express and appreciate through your own collection.
Well said, man. I agree. The community has enhanced my hobby experience greatly since since the advent of all the social media platforms. So that's been great. We only have you for a couple more minutes. You have to get going. Can you share with us 1 or 2 cards that might be sitting on your desk right now, just so we can see a couple from your collection? I do notice a Jerry West rookie over what is your left shoulder as well. That looks nice, framed up on the wall. Why don't you tell us a bit about that? Show us a couple of cards and get going so you can go pick up your son from school.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, good eye there on the Jerry West. Yeah, so that one, that's one of those high eye appeal ones that I looked for a really long time, and I ended up getting the PWCC S sticker on that one when I sent it in. So it's a PSA 5, but it's one of those ones that looks kind of like an 8 or so. So I've got that one up there to look at. I try to rotate, a couple cards around.
I love that you rotate. That's so great.
Yeah, for sure. So one that I have on my desk is the T205 Christy Mathewson, and I just put this one on my Instagram stories the other day. One of the things that I think is really fun on IG that people do is these add yours story posts where they'll come up with a theme. And so the theme is yesterday or the day before was what's on your desk today, which card is on your desk. And, so it's a fun opportunity in the community to kind of show off what you're enjoying in the moment. So I have that one. And then this is probably among my favorite pickups this year, which is the E92 batting Honus Wagner. So, the move toward pre-war, which I've mentioned, it's kind of sort of culminated for me in a Wagner acquisition. I kind of felt like, I had to build my way up to that and, really learn a decent bit about the hobby and, the tobacco issues and candy issues and, kind of really ensconce myself in pre-war pretty fully before I felt qualified to make the leap into a Wagner card. And that was my first one. I got it about 6 months ago. And it's one of those ones where you add it to your collection. And I felt this way when I got my 48 Leaf Jackie and, and my first Babe Ruth card as well. But it's just kind of feels like, wow, my collection feels a little different in a really good way now. And so that's the card that I got that made me feel like that this year.
That's the feeling that we chase. That's right. That's when you can add a card to your collection that feels like your collection has had a transformation, it maybe leveled up or just moved into that next stratosphere is just a wonderful feeling, and it's an accomplishment. And congratulations on that. Leighton, any final comments or questions for Nate before we let him go?
No, Nate, congratulations on the Wagner pickup, and really appreciate you sharing your journey with us and our audience. It was enlightening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really have been enjoying the show. I'm super glad you guys are doing it, and the first segments today were really interesting as well. I enjoyed them a lot. So thank you for having me on, and love what you guys are doing.
Thanks a lot, Nate. We do plan to have both your co-hosts on future episodes. Your co-hosts of Rough Cuts Vintage Hobby Talk, guys. Check that out on YouTube and podcast. Follow them along, and I think our podcast and yours make for a nice pair of vintage themed podcasts right there. So, Nate, thanks again. Say hi to your son, and we will talk to you soon.
Will do. Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Leighton, one thing that jumped out at me that we didn't dive into, but he mentioned the Yogi Berra Tip Top, which sent me. You might have heard me drop my phone on my desk a few minutes ago. That was me looking for the Yogi Berra to see what this was all about, and I did find a copy of it. And I've never laid eyes on this before, but that's what I ended up.
Oh, it's very tough.
Yeah. What enlighten me? What is this?
Sure. So a lot of people are not familiar with bread issues, and that's what Tip Top bread is. It's a bread issue, and I believe that the reason is generally, Jeremy, is because bread issues are not that common. Meaning, I don't think they made a ton across all the different breads, and they're super tough to find. And on top of that, they're even more challenging to find in nice condition. So what I found through the years, and I'm sure you've experienced something similar in your space, with hockey, is that sometimes when a vintage issue is just so challenging and too difficult to acquire, it kind of loses some luster and steam amongst the community. And sometimes it takes, whether it be a generation or an aberration or something, to kind of bring the focus back onto it. And I'm not suggesting that by Nate talking about Tip Top bread Yogi Berra today, that all of a sudden there's going to be a rush for it. But make no mistake, they're complex issues. Some of them are better looking than others. But as he said, it's kind of an XRC rookie. For those that don't know what it means, is like, hey, a rookie card that kind of came out the year before the main rookie card. And that's really exciting in our space. I personally don't collect a ton of bread issues. I do have a couple for the reasons that we just talked about. Some of them are very colorful, but inevitably, I think the highest grade I might have is a 1.5. Like, they're very hard.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned early on there in that explanation was that sometimes when something just becomes so difficult that it does lose its luster, and not that the Sweet Cap postcards have lost their luster, but they're so few and far between that I find that truly the most eclectic type of collectors are the ones that are going after them. Would that somewhat apply to the Tip Top? And my question, and also, is the Yogi Berra, is that the biggest and most important card from that 1947 Tip Top bread set?
I have to go back and check the issue, but some of the Tip Top, bread cards in general that come to mind, or like bread for health, energy, late, like stuff like that. I know that there's important Mickey Mantle ones. In basketball, there's an important George Mikan. So it's not just limited to Tip Top bread. There's a variety of different bread issues. Oh, excuse me. But I'm curious, when I get off the phone, I'm actually going to do a deeper dive into the population, because I haven't looked in years, and I'm curious, are they over 100? Are some of them sub 100? And I think that might go along with what I was saying just a few minutes ago, and maybe why they're still somewhat affordable-ish, because they're just not easy to find. And so no one's really completing sets.
I've learned about 2 new sets here tonight. That's not night, it's morning here where I am. This morning here, recording this episode. That is, it's one thing we try to bring value to the audience, the listeners in terms of the content, but I'm receiving value here today as a co-host, learning about the Rose Company postcards, the Tip Top Bread, 1947, the Yogi Berra. I don't know if you saw the Yogi Berra documentary on Netflix, but it is really, really great. Made me fall in love with Yogi Berra. So really, really cool stuff. Okay, well, listen, final segment this morning would be any of our own personal pickups. I have one that I'm excited to share. How about yourself?
I do. I have a couple next to me here. So why don't you go first, good sir?
I was going to ask you to go first, but okay, if you insist. So now I have shared this on my Instagram, but if you're not on Instagram, you're not following me on there, this will hopefully be the first time you get to see my elation with adding this card to my collection. But very quickly, the backstory. I got a phone call from my friend Mike Davis, who owns Eastridge Hobbies here in Calgary. And he said, hey, can you come on down and have a look at some cards that walked in the door? So I went down, I looked at some cards. There was a 51 Bowman Mantle. There was an 86 Fleer Michael Jordan. There was a 1966 Topps Bobby Orr. And there was a 1933 Gaudy Babe Ruth, number 144, the standing batting pose. I went down and looked at them. And his biggest concern was, are they real? And I looked at them and they all looked real to me. But I'm not the judge and jury on this. I'm not 100% certain, but they all looked good to me from all different sides and angles. And the Babe Ruth looked particularly strong in condition. So that's what I told him. And he said, okay, well, I think I'm going to send them off to PSA. Found out a couple of days later, he actually flew down to California, took them to PSA himself, had a nice weekend, spent some time with Chris Carlin. And they graded the cards on the spot there for him in their whatever that walkthrough service is. Brought them back, put them on the shelf in his store. I walked in. I forgot about when I went and looked at these cards. I walked into the store and I look in his high-end showcase that he has, and I see the Babe Ruth. I see all of them sitting there, and so they're real. He says, yeah, they're real. And I see the Babe Ruth sitting there, and I'm looking at this card, and I notice the grade assigned by PSA, and I'm looking at the card, and this doesn't match up. This just doesn't match up. This card is way nicer than the technical grade. PSA had awarded it a grade of poor, a PSA 1. The card does not look like a 1. I looked at the price tag on the card, and I said to him, well, would you take this? I tried to, negotiate a little bit. He was very firm. He took the position where if I don't sell the card, I'm happy to keep it. And I understood. So I said, okay, I'll take it. And I paid the price. And I am now the very proud owner of this 1933 Gaudy Babe Ruth number 144. It's in a PSA 1 holder. And in my opinion, it looks like a 5 minimum. When you look at it here, Leighton, you're probably asking yourself, how is that a 1? Well, you might say, well, let me see the back, right? Let me see the back. All right, sure. Let me show you the back.
When you turned it around the other day and showed me, I was totally waiting for like a big X, written in black, or part of it's peeled off. I hope besides that store owner that I might be first or second in line in case you ever sell. But the thing is, I can tell by the expression on your face how happy you are. You're not selling that card.
I've been reached out to by a couple of people already saying, is it available? And my response is no, because I value it so much higher than what a PSA 1 sells for. This card is almost, the technical grade is doing it such a disservice, but it did me such a huge service. I was able to purchase this card for, the high end of 1s when I think this card is worth what 5 sell for. It's an example where technical grade is not the most important factor on the card's value, in my opinion.
And it's also a great episode to show that, because after having Nate on, that's the kind of card that Nate would potentially wait 3 years or multiple years for and be patient. And so kudos to you for having it happen in your backyard in Calgary, and that you were able to not only look at it the first time, but I love how, and this is an important lesson for not just a collector, right? But if you're someone who's an investor, that you did ask for a discount, but you didn't let that discourage you when you didn't receive one that you were looking for. You said, you know what? I believe that this is the card for me. I'm going to pay a little bit more than maybe I want, but I'm going to be happy doing that. And I think that that's wonderful that you did that. I just wanted to make sure the audience knows that. So if you could afford graded, do that. If you can only afford ungraded, that's what makes our hobby great.
Yeah, you're right. I felt like this is an opportunity where I have to acquire this card no matter what the ultimate price was going to be. And I did, of course. And now, like you said, the look on my face, this is what's really fun for me, is that this is now my favorite card in my whole collection. And I never would have thought that my favorite card in my collection would be a PSA 1. That just kind of doesn't seem like, but it is. And I love it for all the reasons, especially that I figure this has to be the best card to ever walk into a card shop in Calgary. And I said that to someone online the other day. They said, never mind Calgary, maybe ever to walk into a card shop anywhere. I don't know if that's the case, but to me, this is, to find this at the, and the other cool thing, Leighton, is that I got to hold it before it was graded. I got to hold it raw.
No, you've been part of its journey.
Yeah.
You were there with your buddy at the shop. He asked for your assistance. And then and this is what I love about you, you're so non-assuming. You didn't like call the guy 17 times. Where's the card? What did it grade? You just kind of forgot. And then you ended up going back there, and that's a substantial purchase. So the hobby really, it's a lot of fun. And I'm grateful to be able to do the show with you and also be able to do this for a living.
Yeah, definitely one of my favorite card purchase experiences. And just so people understand, why is this a one? I can tell you there are some very faint wrinkles coming down over here, but I literally have to search for them. I can't see them right now. I have to search for them in the light. There must be something else going on, but I can't see it. So if I can't see it,
that's what's wonderful. If you can't see it, I wouldn't worry about it.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I said to the person online who reached out, asking me if it was available, I said, you know what? I value it so high that I'm definitely going to own this for at least the next 25 years. So absolutely love it. Leighton, as we wrap up the episode, what can you show us that you've acquired recently?
I got a couple of quick photos that I've acquired. I bought them recently out of REA. For those that don't know me, I am, of course, an avid treasure hunter of vintage sports cards, but I also am a collector. And one of the things I collect is vintage photography. Here is the first one. It is Eddie Seacott and Buck Weaver. If you don't know who those guys are, they were on the Black Sox. So this is from 1915. This is an amazing photograph.
Wow. That is beautiful.
The next photograph, because I know we're closing in on an hour. This is amazing. I've been looking for a Martin DeHigo photograph for a long time. This came up in REA. Comes with a letter of authenticity, that it's a type 1. So Martin DeHigo is the giant you see there, 3 from the left. And this is the New York Cubans ball club that he's wearing the uniform of and the jacket. And just that uniform alone is, a sight to be seen. And to have an original photograph of Martin DeHigo now in my collection, I've been waiting years for that. So I'm super pumped. And then the last photo, if you grew up in the 50s and 60s and you were in the New York area, of course you were a Mantle fan. I don't know if there's that many bigger moments when Mickey Mantle crushed a 565-foot home run. And this is literally the photograph of him holding that very baseball that he just smashed. And to me, I love the fact that he's so happy with his accomplishment, but as a memorabilia and a vintage card collector, he's holding an important piece and a valuable piece of baseball history. And so I probably paid a little bit more than I should have for it. I paid about $1,600 or $1,700. But it's missing a piece, or it's got some damage up in there. But I don't know. I love it. I really do. I love it.
I don't think you paid more than you should have. You paid what you had to pay to acquire it.
That's exactly what I did. I wanted to win it.
There's the saying that goes, a card is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. Well, I have 2 addendums. First one is a card is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it at that time, on that platform, etc. The other different saying I have is a card is only worth what someone is willing to let it go for, or an item. And you had to pay what you had to pay to get it. I don't think you overpaid, because when are you ever going to find another one?
I'm very happy with all 3 of these photos, and for whatever it's worth, because I've sold a lot of cards through the years. In my entire, and I have a lot of photos, and I've been collecting for 20 years. I've sold precisely 2 photos my entire life.
So you buy them, you hold them.
I buy and hold them.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Any of the cards, the items that we described, if you are listening, you can see them. If you do go to YouTube, if you want to have a better look, you can go to the YouTube Vintage Spotlight channel and see all of these items. Want to thank everybody for joining. Leighton, you will be set up at the Philly show. I will be walking. You'll be set up. What's your booth number for anyone who's going to be there and wants to check you out?
I don't know offhand, which is probably not the smartest move for our show, but we are the second aisle from the left. We got a big sign. And, you know, Jeremy, you're pretty tall. You're what, 6'5", I'm 6'1". They'll be able to find us, I'm sure.
There you go. Check out the Just Collect booth at the Philly show. If you see me walking around, please say hello. Let's have a fist bump. Let's take a selfie together. Want to thank everybody for joining. If you're watching on YouTube, the episodes of Vintage Spotlight are also available on podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. Please check it out. Leave a rating, leave a review. We greatly appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to this episode number 5. Have a great day. Leighton, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nate.
And thanks to Nate as well. Thanks, everybody.